Unconscious, I was rushed into the ER. When the doctors called my parents, they refused to come. Our other daughter has Tio walk her dog, they said, even after being told she might not survive tonight. A week later, they arrived at last. My room was empty, a note left behind. The moment their eyes scanned it, their faces went pale. This isn't just a story about neglect, it's about a betrayal so profound it rips open your entire world. Imagine fighting for your life, slipping in and out of consciousness, only to learn your own parents chose to leave you alone in that hospital bed because my sister, Victoria, needed help walking her dog. That night, the doctors told them I might not make it, but they never showed. And in that shattering moment, I knew this wasn't just another disappointment. This was the last straw. Let me tell you, that wasn't the first time they picked Victoria over me. Not by a long shot. But I promised myself it would be the very last. What I did next, the letter I left behind, it changed absolutely everything. Growing up in our quiet, perfectly manicured suburban house in Pennsylvania, you'd think we were the ideal family. My parents, Harold and Diana Wilson, had 2 daughters, me, Sophia, the oldest, and Victoria, who arrived 3 years later. But from the moment Victoria was born, something shifted. It was subtle at first, then painfully obvious. I remember being 7, bursting with pride after winning first place in the school science fair. I rushed home, blue ribbon clutched tight, ready for my parents' praise. Instead, I got a quick pat on the head before their attention snapped back to Victoria, who was learning to ride her bike without training wheels. I told myself it made sense. Riding a bike, that's a bigger deal, right? By 12, I was an expert at rationalizing. When I brought home straight A's, my mom would nod approvingly, but save her ecstatic cheers for Victoria's B- in art. When I qualified for the state swimming championships, my dad said he was proud, then immediately explained he couldn't come because Victoria had a minor cold. It became my default. Asterisk, they're busy. Victoria's younger, she needs more. I'm strong, I can handle it. Asterisk, I convinced myself these were perfectly valid reasons why my achievements seemed to vanish, while Victoria's smallest successes were grand celebrations. But then my health got complicated. At 16, I was hit with a severe autoimmune disorder. Daily medication, constant monitoring, and the terrifying knowledge that stress, certain foods, and especially animal dander could trigger a life-threatening flare-up. Even with this serious diagnosis, my parents treated my health issues like they were just an inconvenience. My mom would sigh about rearranging her schedule for my doctor appointments. My dad would complain about the medical bills on the way to the emergency room. Victoria, on the other hand, she was the picture of health. Energetic, outgoing, a high school soccer star. My parents never missed a single game. They'd be there in the stands, huge homemade signs, screaming her name, while I sat beside them, often feeling dizzy or nauseated from a flare-up. Still, I was determined to support her, even if they rarely supported me. As we got older, the favoritism became a chasm. When it was time for college, they told me they could only afford to help one of us financially. Naturally, since Victoria wasn't academically inclined, she needed the support more. So, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school, keeping a 4.0 GPA. Victoria? She dropped out after 1 semester, found it too stressful. My parents' comfort prize for her stress? A brand new car. Despite all of it, a part of me, a desperate, hopeful part, kept believing they'd eventually see me. Really see me. I kept striving for their approval, their attention, their love. I graduated with honors, landed a great job, and still made sure to visit home constantly. I brought thoughtful gifts, remembered all their favorite things, tried to be the perfect daughter. But no matter what I did, Victoria remained the sun around which our family revolved. Last year, after yet another holiday where I felt like a stranger in my own home, I finally decided to create some distance. I moved to a city about 30 miles away. Close enough to visit, but far enough to build my own life, a life not defined by their approval. Victoria, now 23, still lived at home. She cycled through part-time jobs, none lasting more than a few months, spending most of her time shopping and posting on social media. My parents, of course, continued to bankroll her life, acting like this was perfectly normal for a woman in her 20s. Then came the dog. Not just any dog, but an expensive, purebred Samoyed that cost over $3,000. Despite knowing about my severe allergies, my parents didn't just approve. They paid for the dog and all its accessories. They even converted their home office into a special room just for him, with custom furniture and climate control. When I nervously mentioned I wouldn't be able to visit anymore, my mother simply said, "You can take your medication, sweetie. Victoria really needs this dog for her emotional well-being." That was my family distilled. Victoria's emotional well-being trumped my physical health. Her desires always outweighed my needs. But even then, some desperate part of me clung to the hope that things would change. I even tried to maintain a good relationship with Victoria. She was spoiled, self-centered, yes, but I didn't think she was malicious. She'd grown up being the priority. She didn't know anything else. Sometimes, when it was just the two of us, I'd glimpse the sweet little sister I'd built sandcastles with. Those fleeting moments kept me holding on, believing there was a real family connection beneath all the dysfunction. Looking back, I can see I was setting myself up for catastrophic disappointment. I was clutching onto a fantasy, refusing to accept the brutal reality of who they were and how little they valued me. But sometimes, fantasies are just easier than harsh truths, especially when those truths cut straight to your soul. I had spent 26 years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. It would take a near-death experience for me to finally understand that no amount of trying would ever be enough. 3 months ago, after weeks of minimal contact, I decided to try again. I called my mom, suggesting dinner. To my shock, she sounded genuinely excited. "That sounds wonderful, Sophia. We haven't seen you in so long. I'll make your favorite lasagna, and your father will pick up that cheesecake you like." Her enthusiasm sparked that old, familiar hope. Asterisk, maybe they noticed my absence. Maybe they do care. Asterisk, I spent the week excitedly planning, splurging on a nice bottle of wine, a new outfit. As Saturday approached, I took extra doses of my medication. My condition had been stable, and I wanted to keep it that way. I also braced myself mentally. Asterisk, don't expect too much. Focus on any positives. Don't dwell on disappointments. Asterisk, when I arrived, my mom greeted me with a warm hug, the smell of lasagna filling the air. For a fleeting moment, everything felt perfect. Then I heard it. A bark. My heart plummeted. "Is Victoria's dog here?" I asked, already feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. "Of course, Snowball is here. This is his home," my mother replied, as if I'd asked the most idiotic question. "Victoria brought him back from her apartment this morning. She's staying the weekend." I hadn't even known Victoria had moved out, but that was a problem for another time. Right now, I couldn't breathe. "Mom, you know I'm severely allergic to dogs. I can't be in the same house for extended periods, even with medication. We talked about this." My mother's expression hardened. "Well, we can't just put him outside. It's too cold and Victoria would be heartbroken. You'll be fine, Sophia. Just take another pill if you need to." Before I could respond, my father appeared, beaming. "There's my girl. Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." I hesitated. I'd brought wine, a new outfit. I'd built up all this hope. Walking away now would only confirm my role as the difficult daughter. So I stepped inside. Victoria was on the couch, curled up with Snowball, a huge, fluffy white dog who immediately barked excitedly. Victoria looked up from her phone long enough to wave. "Hey, sis. Look how big Snowball's gotten. Isn't he gorgeous?" She buried her face in his fur, completely oblivious to my discomfort. I kept my distance, trying to breathe shallowly. "He's certainly fluffy," I wheezed. "I didn't realize he'd be here tonight. Where else would he be?" Victoria laughed. "He's family." He's family, those words twisted in my gut. A dog she'd owned for less than a year was family, but I, their daughter of 26 years, was expected to risk my health to accommodate him? I excused myself to the bathroom, took another dose of allergy medication, and used my inhaler. Staring at the hives already forming on my neck, I gave myself a pep talk. Asterisk, just get through dinner. Keep the peace. It's only a few hours. Asterisk we sat down. The lasagna was delicious, but I could barely taste it through my increasingly congested sinuses. The conversation, of course, revolved almost entirely around Victoria and Snowball. His training, the cute things he did, the expensive organic food, the dog's social events. Every time I tried to contribute, my recent promotion, the night classes I'd started, my parents would nod politely, then swiftly pivot back to Snowball's preferences in chew toys. By dessert, my eyes were streaming, my breathing labored, hives blooming across my visible skin. Victoria finally noticed. "Whoa, Sophia, you look terrible. Are you having a reaction or something?" "Yes." To Snowball, I wheezed. "I told Mom I'm allergic when I arrived." My mother frowned. "I thought you were exaggerating. You always were a bit dramatic about your health issues." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, trying to steady my voice through my growing anger and discomfort. "I have a documented medical condition. My doctor warned me about prolonged exposure to animal dander." "Well, you seem fine enough to eat a full dinner and dessert," my father pointed out, as if eating negated my medical distress. "I think I should go," I said, standing. "Thank you for dinner, but I'm not feeling well." "Already? But we haven't even had coffee yet," my mother protested. "And I wanted to show you the new curtains." "Another time," I said, grabbing my purse. "I need to get home and take more medication." Victoria rolled her eyes. "You're always so serious about everything, Sophia. It's just a little allergic reaction. Pop a Benadryl and chill out." I didn't bother responding. I thanked my parents again, declined their half-hearted offers to stay, and made my way to my car. Driving home, my chest tightened. My breathing became a struggle. I stopped at a pharmacy, bought more antihistamines, swallowing them immediately. By the time I reached my apartment, I was utterly exhausted, physically from the reaction, emotionally from yet another family gathering where I felt utterly invisible. I used my nebulizer, took a cool shower for the hives, and collapsed into bed. As I drifted off, I told myself the usual lie, asterisk, they didn't mean to hurt me. They just don't understand. Victoria's their baby. I'm stronger, more independent. I don't need their attention like she does. Asterisk, but a small, insistent voice whispered a different truth. Asterisk, they understood perfectly well. They just didn't care enough to change. Asterisk, and no amount of strength or independence could fill the void left by parents who consistently chose someone else over you. I pushed that voice away and fell into a troubled sleep, unaware that this minor incident was just the prelude to a health crisis that would finally force me to confront the painful reality of my family dynamic once and for all. 3 days after that disastrous dinner, I woke up feeling like an elephant was sitting on my chest. My skin burned with hives, and when I tried to stand, the room spun. I grabbed my phone, called my doctor, leaving a message about my symptoms and the dog exposure. This wasn't my first severe reaction, but it was definitely among the worst. Usually, symptoms would peak and then subside after a day or two. The fact that I was getting worse on day 3 was terrifying. I had a huge presentation that day, weeks of work riding on it. Missing it felt like failure. I'd spent my entire life pushing through illness to meet expectations, and today would be no different. As I drove to work, memories of past health crises flooded my mind. When I was 17, my first major autoimmune flare-up landed me in the hospital for 3 days. My mother visited once, for less than an hour, explaining Victoria had a recital she couldn't miss. My father called daily, but never came. Hospitals made him uncomfortable. During my sophomore year of college, I had pneumonia so bad I could barely walk. My roommate called my parents, concerned. They sent money for medication, then explained they couldn't visit because Victoria was going through a breakup and needed their emotional support. Each time I told myself, asterisk, it's fine. I'm an adult. I can handle being sick alone. I don't need my mommy and daddy to hold my hand, asterisk, but the truth was, being chronically ill with no family support was incredibly lonely and demoralizing. By the time I reached my office, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. My breathing was shallow, rapid, and dark spots danced at the edges of my vision. My colleague Natalie took one look at me stumbling to my desk and rushed over. "Sophia, you look absolutely terrible." What's going on? Her face was creased with genuine concern. Allergic reaction, I managed, gasping for breath. Got exposed to a dog at my parents' house. Thought I could push through it. Natalie frowned. You need to see a doctor right now. This looks serious. I have a presentation, I protested weakly. I'll cover your presentation, she insisted. Your health is more important than any work meeting. Do you need me to drive you to urgent care? I shook my head, touched by her concern but still reluctant to admit how bad I felt. I'll call my doctor again. If they think I should come in, I'll get an Uber. Natalie looked skeptical but returned to her desk after I promised to keep her updated. I called my doctor's office again and was immediately put through to the nurse. After I described my symptoms, she told me, in no uncertain terms, to go to the emergency room immediately. This sounds like it could be developing into anaphylaxis, she explained. With your history, we cannot take chances. You need to be seen right away. I hung up, sitting there for a moment, options swirling. Part of me still wanted to stay for the presentation, to prove I could push through anything. But another part, the rational part that had been silenced so often, knew this was serious. I gathered my things and approached Natalie's desk. The nurse said I should go to the ER. I'm driving you, she said, already reaching for her purse. You shouldn't be alone right now. I tried to protest, but she was insistent. And honestly, I was relieved. As my condition had deteriorated throughout the morning, a growing sense of fear had been building inside me. Something was very wrong, and the thought of facing it alone was terrifying. As Natalie drove me to the hospital, I decided to call my parents. Despite everything, they were my family, and a small, desperate part of me still hoped that in a true emergency, they would be there. The call went to voicemail. I left a brief message, explaining I was having a severe reaction and heading to the hospital. I tried to keep my voice steady, not wanting to sound dramatic, but hoping they'd understand the seriousness. Next, I tried Victoria, thinking she might reach them. Hey, what's up? She answered, Snowball barking loudly in the background. Victoria, I'm having a really bad reaction, I explained, my voice growing weaker. I'm on my way to the hospital. I can't reach Mom and Dad. Sorry, he's trying to eat my shoes. Yeah, I'll tell them when I see them. They're taking me and Snowball to that new dog park today. Victoria, this is serious, I emphasized. I need them to know I'm going to the hospital now. Okay, I'll text them. Gotta go. Snowball's destroying my favorite sneakers. Feel better. And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Even now, with me heading to the emergency room, Victoria and her dog remained the priority. I slumped back against the car seat, fighting tears of frustration and hurt. Family? Natalie asked sympathetically. Something like that, I muttered. By the time we reached the hospital, I was struggling to stay conscious. My throat felt like it was closing. The hives had spread to the point where my skin felt like it was on fire. Natalie helped me into the emergency room, where the triage nurse took one look and immediately called for assistance. What followed was a blur. I was rushed into a treatment area, given injections of epinephrine and steroids, hooked up to monitors. Doctors fired questions at me, but I was fading in and out. The last clear memory I had was calling out for my neighbor, Mrs. Garza, asking her to feed my cat. Mrs. Garza wasn't there, of course, but in my confused state, my pet being alone was my biggest concern. Then, darkness. I later learned that as my condition worsened, the hospital staff made multiple attempts to contact my parents. They finally reached them around 6 p.m., some 4 hours after I'd been admitted. The conversation, as it was relayed to me later by a nurse, went something like this. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your daughter Sophia has been admitted with a severe anaphylactic reaction. Her condition is critical, and we strongly recommend you come immediately. My father had apparently replied, tonight? We cannot possibly come tonight. Our other daughter is walking her dog at that new park across town, and we need to pick her up afterward. Sir, I don't think you understand. Your daughter is in critical condition. The doctors are doing everything they can, but her organs are starting to show signs of stress. Tonight might be her last night. You really should be here. There was a pause before my mother spoke. Well, we can't just leave Victoria stranded with her dog. Surely Sophia will stabilize soon. We can come by tomorrow if she's still there. The nurse had been so shocked she could barely respond. I will note in her chart that you were informed of her condition, she'd finally said, hanging up. As I drifted through varying states of consciousness, I was vaguely aware of voices, beeping machines, gentle hands. At one point, I opened my eyes to see an older nurse, with kind eyes and gray hair, holding my hand. "You hang in there, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm staying right here with you." I squeezed her hand weakly, grateful for this stranger's compassion when my own family had abandoned me once again. Throughout the night, my condition remained critical. My body was at war with itself. The medical team worked tirelessly, adjusting medications. By morning, I had stabilized somewhat, though I remained in the ICU. The crisis had passed, but the damage to my body, and even more so, to my heart, had been done. Natalie had contacted some of my other colleagues, and throughout the next day, a steady stream of coworkers and friends came to visit. They brought flowers, cards, and genuine concern. People I saw every day, but had never considered close friends, showed up and sat with me, sharing stories, keeping my spirits up. Not once did my parents call to check on my condition. Not once did Victoria text to see if I was still alive. As the reality of their absence sank in, something inside me finally broke. The fantasy I'd clung to for 26 years, the hope that deep down my family truly loved me, finally shattered completely. In its place grew a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I saw my family exactly as they were, not as I wished them to be. And with that clarity came the beginning of a plan, the letter that would change everything. The first 72 hours in the hospital were mostly a blur. Flashes of consciousness, the cold rush of medication, the constant beeping, the squeak of the oxygen mask. What I remember with perfect clarity, however, is the moment I fully regained consciousness and realized no one from my family was there. I opened my eyes to the sterile white ceiling of the ICU and turned my head, half expecting, against all reason, to see my mother in the chair beside the bed. Instead, there was a young nurse checking my vitals. "Welcome back," she said with a warm smile. "You gave us quite a scare." "My parents?" I asked, my voice a painful rasp. Her smile faltered slightly. "I don't believe they've been in yet. Would you like me to try calling them again?" That was it. That was when the full, gut-wrenching reality hit me. I had nearly died, and my parents had chosen not to come because Victoria needed help with her dog. I had known they favored her, but some part of me had always believed that in a true life-or-death situation, they would be there for me, too. That belief had been the last thread holding together my image of us as a real family. Now, that thread had snapped. "No," I said after a long moment. "Don't call them." The nurse, whose name badge read Ellie, seemed to understand. She gently patted my hand. "You've had other visitors, though. A woman named Natalie has been here every day, and several other friends have stopped by. They've been very concerned about you." Tears slid down my cheeks. Colleagues and casual friends had shown more care for me than my own parents. The contrast was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Throughout that day, as my condition stabilized enough for me to stay conscious longer, I learned more. Dr. Rivera, a specialist in immunology, came to explain the severity of what my body had gone through. "You experienced a particularly severe biphasic anaphylactic reaction," she explained. "The initial exposure triggered the first phase, but then your body seemed to recover slightly before launching into a much more severe second phase. This is why you felt worse days after the exposure. Your autoimmune condition complicated matters, essentially creating a perfect storm in your system." "Could I have died?" I asked, needing to hear the truth. Dr. Rivera looked me directly in the eyes. "Yes, Sophia. Without prompt medical intervention, this type of reaction can be fatal. The fact that your symptoms progressed over days rather than hours actually made it more dangerous, as many people wouldn't seek help until critical organ systems were already compromised." She went on to explain that I'd need to stay in the hospital for at least another week. The extended dog exposure had triggered such a severe response that my entire treatment plan needed to be reconsidered. As the day progressed, more pieces fell into place. Natalie visited during her lunch break and filled me in. "The emergency room staff called your parents multiple times," she said, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. I was still there for the first call, and I could not believe what I was hearing. The doctor literally told them, "You might not make it through the night," and they said they couldn't come because Victoria needed help with her dog. I nearly grabbed the phone to scream at them myself. She told me she had stayed until late that night, only leaving when the nurses assured her I had stabilized. She'd returned the next morning and had been checking in daily since. Other colleagues had organized a rotation so someone would visit me at least once a day. "We all pitched in for the flowers," she added, gesturing to a beautiful arrangement. "And Brian said not to worry about the presentation. He rescheduled it for when you're back." I was overwhelmed by their kindness. These people, who had no obligation to me beyond professional courtesy, had stepped up to support me in ways my family never had. As evening approached, Ellie came back to check on me. She had a strange expression. "Your parents called the nurse's station," she said hesitantly. "They wanted to know your condition and said they might come by tomorrow." Might I repeated the word, tasting bitterness. "I can make sure they're updated on your condition if you'd prefer not to see them," she offered, having picked up on my distress. I was silent for a long moment, processing the emotions churning within me: anger, hurt, disappointment, but strangely, also a growing sense of resolve. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my relationship with my parents with complete clarity, stripped of the desperate hope and excuses I had always made for them. "If they come," I finally said, "I don't want to see them yet. Please tell them I'm resting and cannot have visitors." Ellie nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. "Of course." That night, as I lay awake listening to the rhythmic sounds of the hospital, I made a decision. I would use this time, this forced pause in my life, to finally address the toxic dynamic that had shaped my existence for 26 years. I would write a letter of final communication to my parents, laying bare the truth of our relationship and establishing the boundaries I should have set long ago. The next morning, I asked Ellie for paper and a pen. She brought them without question, along with a small lap desk. As my strength slowly returned over the next few days, I worked on the letter, pouring out decades of hurt, disappointment, and finally, my decision to prioritize my own well-being. During this time, the contrast between my biological family and the community that had formed around me grew increasingly stark. Natalie continued to visit daily, often bringing comforts from home or updates from work. Other colleagues stopped by with books, magazines, and conversation. Mrs. Garza, my elderly neighbor whom I had called out for in my delirium, actually did come to visit after Natalie tracked her down to check on my cat. She arrived with homemade soup, a thermos, and stories about my cat, having taken it upon herself to care for him. "I have 5 children and 12 grandchildren," she told me, "but none of them live nearby. We look out for each other, you and I. That's what neighbors should do." Even Dr. Rivera went beyond professional requirements, spending extra time explaining my condition, answering all my questions with patience and respect. When I mentioned my parents' refusal to come, she didn't offer platitudes or excuse their behavior. "That must be incredibly painful," she said, simply acknowledging my hurt without minimizing it. "Sometimes the families we create in life are more important than the ones we are born into." Her words stayed with me as I continued to work on my letter. By the 6th day of my hospitalization, I had completed it. A 4-page, handwritten document that represented both an ending and a beginning. I sealed it in an envelope Ellie provided and waited. On the 7th day, as I was starting to prepare for discharge, Ellie came into my room with news. "Your parents called again. They said they're definitely coming to visit this afternoon, around 3. Would you like me to tell them you're not receiving visitors?" I took a deep breath, feeling strangely calm. "No, I want you to let them come. But I won't be here." She looked confused. "Are you being discharged this morning?" "Yes," I said, having already discussed my release with Dr. Rivera. "But I have a favor to ask. When my parents arrive, could you give them this?" I handed her the sealed envelope. "And could you place it on the bed so it looks like I left it there for them to find?" Ellie looked at the envelope, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Of course," she said softly. "I can arrange that." By 2:30 that afternoon, I had been officially discharged. Natalie had picked me up, and we were waiting in a small coffee shop across from the hospital. From where we sat, I could see the entrance. At precisely 3:15, I watched my parents walk through those doors, finally coming to see their daughter after she had nearly died a full week earlier. I didn't know exactly what would happen when they read my letter, but I knew with absolute certainty that our relationship would never be the same again. And for the first time in my life, that thought didn't fill me with dread, but with a profound sense of liberation. Natalie's spare bedroom became my sanctuary for the next 2 weeks. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a pet-free building with abundant natural light. It was the perfect environment for my physical recovery, free from allergens, full of fresh air and sunshine. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted when I worried about imposing. "I live alone and have plenty of space. Plus, I enjoy the company." The first few days were solely focused on regaining physical strength. I slept 12 to 14 hours a day, my body demanding rest to heal from the trauma it had endured. Dr. Rivera had prescribed a new medication regimen, and Natalie helped me keep track of the various pills and injections. As my body slowly recovered, my mind began the equally important process of healing from decades of emotional neglect. The letter I had left for my parents had been a watershed moment, a clear line drawn between the person I had been, desperate for their approval, and the person I was becoming, determined to value myself, even if they never would. The contents of that letter had poured out of me during those hospital days. Each word a release of pain I had carried for too long. "Dear Mom and Dad, by the time you read this, I will have been discharged from the hospital, where I spent a week fighting for my life. The doctors called you the first night and told you I might not survive until morning. You chose not to come because Victoria needed help walking her dog. This was not the first time you have chosen Victoria over me. It has been the pattern of our family since my earliest memories. For 26 years, I have made excuses for your behavior. I have told myself that Victoria needed you more, that I was stronger and more independent, that someday you would see me and value me equally. I nearly died waiting for that day to come. I do not write this letter out of anger, though I have every right to be angry. I write it from a place of clarity and self-preservation. I can no longer participate in a family dynamic that consistently places my needs, my accomplishments, and even my life below those of my sister and now her dog. From this point forward, I am stepping back from our relationship. I need time and space to heal, not just from this most recent health crisis, but from the lifelong pattern of being treated as less than. I will not be contacting you for the foreseeable future, and I ask that you respect my decision by not attempting to contact me either. If at some point you are genuinely interested in building a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect and equal consideration, then we can revisit this decision. That would require acknowledgement of the harm that has been done and a commitment to change on your part. I do not hold out much hope for this outcome, but I leave the door unlocked rather than sealed shut. Not for your sake, but for mine. Because despite everything, letting go of the dream of having parents who truly see and value me is the hardest thing I have ever done. I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing it to save myself. Sophia, I had no way of knowing how they had reacted. Part of me expected frantic phone calls, or even a visit to Natalie's apartment, but there had been nothing. Complete silence. In its way, that was the most telling response of all. A week after my discharge, I began seeing a therapist named Lydia, whom Dr. Rivera had recommended. Our first session focused on the immediate trauma, the family abandonment. But as the weeks progressed, we dug deeper. "What you are describing," Lydia explained, "is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic. Families with this pattern typically elevate one child, the golden child, as the repository of all their positive projections, while using another child, the scapegoat, as the target for all negative projections." "But why?" I asked. "What did I ever do to deserve being the scapegoat?" "Nothing," Lydia said firmly. "This has nothing to do with anything you did or didn't do. This dynamic develops from the parents' own unresolved issues and insecurities. The golden child makes them feel good because that child's dependency validates their importance. The more independent child often becomes the scapegoat precisely because their self-sufficiency threatens the parent's sense of being needed. Her explanation struck a deep chord. My entire life, I had believed that if I could just achieve enough, be perfect enough, somehow earn their love, things would change. But the truth was, my very strengths were what had made me the target of their neglect. The most insidious aspect of this dynamic, Lydia continued, is how it trains the scapegoat to constantly seek approval that will never come. You have been running on a hamster wheel of achievement and self-sacrifice, hoping to finally win the love that should have been freely given to you. So, what do I do now? I asked, feeling both liberated and lost. You grieve, she said gently. You acknowledge the parents you deserved, but never had. You feel the anger, the sadness, the loss, and then gradually, you build a life based on your own values, rather than the desperate hope of finally being seen by people who have shown they are incapable of truly seeing you. Those sessions with Lydia became the foundation of my healing. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full range of emotions without immediately dismissing them or making excuses. I cried for the little girl who had brought home achievement after achievement, only to be ignored. I raged at the parents who had chosen a dog over their daughter's life. I mourned the family I had always wanted but never truly had. Alongside this emotional work, I began the practical process of rebuilding my life. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, I felt strong enough to return to my own apartment. Mrs. Garza welcomed me home with another container of homemade soup and updates about my cat, who had apparently decided her apartment was an acceptable second residence. He still comes to visit me every afternoon, she said with a chuckle. I think he's decided we are family now. Her casual use of the word family made me smile. Perhaps family wasn't defined by blood, but by who showed up when it mattered. As I settled back into my apartment, I made significant changes. I invested in high-quality air purifiers for every room. I updated my emergency contacts, removing my parents and adding Natalie and, after asking her permission, Mrs. Garza. I even changed my advanced medical directive to explicitly state that my parents should not be consulted for medical decisions if I was incapacitated. 3 weeks after my discharge, I felt ready to return to work. My colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, and Brian, my supervisor, assured me my position had been secure. Take it easy your first week back, he advised. Your health comes first. The work will still be here. His consideration, so different from what I had experienced from my family, reinforced my growing understanding that respect and care should be normal, not exceptional, in relationships. Throughout this time, I maintained my silence with my parents. Victoria had texted once, a casual, "Hey, how are you feeling?" as if I'd had a minor cold. I'd responded with a brief recovering thanks, but didn't elaborate. My parents had finally called 4 days after reading my letter. I let it go to voicemail. My mother's message was short and strained. Sophia, this is your mother. We got your letter. I think you are being very dramatic about this whole situation. Your father and I have always done our best for both you and Victoria. Call us when you are feeling more rational. Her words, so dismissive of my near-death experience and the legitimate pain I had expressed, only confirmed that I had made the right decision in stepping back. There was no acknowledgement of their failure to come, no recognition of the pattern I described, not even a simple, "I'm sorry you felt that way." As the 4th week of my recovery began, I received a surprising call from Victoria. "Mom and Dad are acting weird," she said without preamble. "They won't tell me what was in your letter, but they've been fighting a lot and Mom keeps crying at random times." "What did you say to them?" "I told them the truth," I replied simply. "About how they've treated me compared to you for our entire lives. About how they chose not to come to the hospital when doctors said I might die because you needed help with your dog." There was a long silence. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice was subdued. "I didn't know it was that serious. They just said you were having an allergic reaction and would be fine. Would you have done anything differently if you had known?" I asked, genuinely curious. Another pause. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I've never had to think about it before. Things have always revolved around what I want. Her honesty was surprising and, in its way, refreshing. That's not your fault, I said. That's how they raised you. But I can't be part of that dynamic anymore. It nearly killed me, literally. Are you saying you don't want to be my sister anymore? There was a hint of the little girl I'd once built sandcastles within her voice. No, I said softly. I'm saying I need to rebuild my relationship with myself first. I've spent my whole life trying to earn love from our parents by being perfect, achieving everything, never complaining. It has left me hollow inside. I need to learn who I am when I'm not desperately seeking approval. I didn't know you felt that way, Victoria said. You always seemed so together, so strong. That was the mask I wore, I explained. But underneath, I was drowning. Our conversation ended shortly after, with no real resolution, but perhaps a small crack in the facade of our family dynamic. I didn't know if Victoria would reflect on what I'd said or immediately dismiss it. I didn't know if she'd report back to our parents. For once, I decided not to worry about any of that. Their reactions were their own responsibility, not mine. As I prepared for bed that night, I stood before my bathroom mirror and really looked. The physical toll was still visible, my thin face, the lingering shadows under my eyes. But there was something else there too. A steadiness in my gaze that hadn't been there before. The desperate need for approval that had driven me for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by something quieter, but far more powerful, self-acceptance. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Decades of unhealthy patterns couldn't be undone in a few weeks. But for the first time, I was facing that journey not as the family scapegoat seeking redemption, but simply as Sophia, a woman worthy of respect, consideration, and love, exactly as she was. The day my parents finally came to the hospital, only to find my empty bed and that letter, was a pivotal moment in all our lives. Though I wasn't physically present, what I know about their reaction comes from Ellie, the nurse, who had become something of an ally during my stay. She called me the day after my discharge, having gotten my number with my permission. I hope you don't mind me reaching out, she said. I just thought you might want to know what happened when your parents arrived. I did want to know, though a part of me feared the answer. Please tell me. They came right at 3, like they said they would, Ellie recounted. I directed them to your room and told them you had been discharged earlier that day. Your father seemed annoyed, asking why no one had called to tell them. Your mother went straight to the bed and saw your letter. According to Ellie, my mother had picked up the envelope with my name in my distinctive handwriting. She had called my father over, and they had opened it together, standing side by side at the foot of the empty hospital bed. I gave them privacy, Ellie continued, but I could see them through the window in the door. I have never seen someone's expression change so dramatically. Your father's face turned red, then almost purple. Your mother went completely white, like all the blood drained from her face at once. She sat down on the bed about halfway through reading, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. When they had finished, my father had crumpled the letter in his fist, then immediately smoothed it out again as if regretting the impulse. My mother had simply sat there, staring at nothing. They stayed in that room for almost 45 minutes, Ellie said. Not talking much, just sitting there. When they finally left, your mother was crying, and your father looked like he had aged 10 years in an hour. I listened with a strange detachment, as if hearing about strangers. Their reaction suggested my words had hit home in a way I hadn't expected. Perhaps, for the first time, they were seeing our family dynamic through unclouded eyes. Thank you for telling me, I said to Ellie. And thank you for everything you did for me during my stay. You're welcome, she replied warmly. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You deserve it. Those words, you deserve it, echoed in my mind long after we hung up. Did I deserve care and consideration? The rational part of me knew the answer was yes. But decades of being treated as less than had left deep grooves of doubt in my psyche. In the days following my conversation with Ellie, I braced myself for an onslaught of calls, texts, or even a visit from my parents. I had arranged to stay with Natalie temporarily, both to recover and to give myself space. But the expected barrage never came. Instead, there was only silence, broken by that single text from Victoria. The silence continued until 6 days after reading my letter, when my parents finally called. I let the call go to voicemail, not yet ready to engage directly. My mother's message, dismissing my experience as dramatic and suggesting I was being irrational, confirmed that they were not yet capable of the honest reflection our relationship would require to heal. 2 days after that call, I received a lengthy email from my father. Unlike my mother's dismissive voicemail, his message showed at least some attempted introspection. Sophia, your letter has forced your mother and me to confront some uncomfortable truths about our family. While I do not agree with everything you wrote, I cannot deny that we have not always been as attentive to your needs as we should have been. The night the hospital called, we genuinely did not understand the severity of the situation. We have become so accustomed to you handling everything on your own that we assumed this would be no different. That was our mistake, and I am sorry for it. However, I believe you are being unfair in your characterization of our entire relationship. We have always been proud of your achievements and independence. Perhaps we did not show it in the ways you needed, but that does not mean the feeling was not there. I hope you will reconsider your decision to cut us off. Victoria misses you, and despite what you may believe, so do we. Dad, his words reflected the beginning of awareness, but stopped far short of true understanding. The line about being proud of my achievements, without acknowledging that they had never bothered to attend my graduations or other milestone events, spoke volumes. His assertion that they didn't understand the severity of a situation where doctors explicitly said I might not survive the night revealed how deeply ingrained their dismissal of my needs truly was. I didn't respond to the email immediately. Instead, I forwarded it to Lydia, my therapist, and we discussed it in our next session. This is actually quite typical, she observed. There is acknowledgement of the specific incident that triggered the confrontation, but resistance to seeing the larger pattern. Note how he says, you're being unfair in your characterization, essentially telling you that your lived experience is incorrect. Should I respond? I asked. That depends entirely on what you want from this interaction, she replied. If you are hoping for full acknowledgement and change, this email suggests they are not there yet. If you want to maintain some connection while establishing boundaries, a brief, neutral response might be appropriate. If you truly need complete space right now, silence is a valid option. After careful consideration, I decided to send a brief reply. Dad, thank you for acknowledging that you should have come to the hospital. That means something to me. However, this is not about one incident. It is about a lifelong pattern that nearly cost me my life. I need time and space to heal, both physically and emotionally. I hope you can respect that. Sophia short, direct, and maintaining my boundary while acknowledging his small step toward understanding. I didn't receive a reply. As the weeks passed and I settled back into my apartment and work routine, the silence from my parents continued. Victoria, however, began to reach out more frequently. Her texts evolved from casual check-ins to more thoughtful inquiries about my recovery, and eventually, tentative questions about our childhood. Was it really that bad for you growing up? She asked during one phone call about a month after my hospital discharge. I always talked about how impressive you were. That was the outside, I explained. Inside, I was constantly striving to be perfect enough to finally earn Mom and Dad's attention and approval. Do you remember my high school graduation? I was valedictorian, but Mom and Dad left right after the ceremony because you had a minor cold. I do remember that, she said slowly. I didn't even have a fever. Mom just said I looked peaked and needed to rest. And my college graduation, I continued. They missed it entirely because you had a date that night and needed help choosing an outfit. I had forgotten about that, she admitted, her voice small. When you put it all together like that, it does sound really bad. These conversations with Victoria were complicated. On one hand, she had been as much a product of our dysfunctional family system as I had been, just playing a different role. On the other hand, she had benefited from that system at my expense for our entire lives. I tried to balance honesty about my experience with the understanding that her awakening to the reality of our family dynamic would be its own painful journey. 6 weeks after my hospital discharge, when I was fully back at work and settling into my new normal, the confrontation I had been both expecting and dreading finally occurred. My parents showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday afternoon. I saw them through the peephole and considered not answering, but after taking a deep breath and centering myself, I decided to face them directly. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Sophia," my mother said, her voice wavering slightly. "You look well. What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "We need to talk," my father said. "This has gone on long enough. You cannot just cut your family out of your life because of one misunderstanding." The minimization of my near-death experience as a misunderstanding sent a flare of anger through me. But I kept my expression calm. "This is not a good time. If you want to talk, you need to call first and respect my boundaries." "Boundaries?" My mother scoffed. "We need permission to see our own daughter?" "Actually, you do," I said firmly. "That is exactly what a boundary is. I asked for space in my letter, and showing up unannounced at my home is disrespecting that request." "This is ridiculous." My father huffed. "Victoria said you've been filling her head with all sorts of accusations about us being bad parents. We have done everything for you girls." "I have only told Victoria the truth about my experience," I replied. "If that conflicts with the story you have told yourselves about our family, that is something you need to examine." My mother's face crumpled. "How can you be so cold? Do you know how much you have hurt us with all this?" The familiar guilt began to rise in me, the lifetime habit of taking responsibility for their feelings. But I pushed it back down. "I nearly died, Mom. Alone in a hospital, because you and Dad chose Victoria's dog over coming to be with me. I am not responsible for your feelings about that reality." They continued to push, using every tactic that had worked in the past: guilt, obligation, dismissal, appeals to family loyalty. But something had fundamentally changed in me. The desperate need for their approval had been replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of my own worth and the treatment I deserved. After 15 minutes of circular conversation that was getting nowhere, I finally said, "I'm going to close the door now. Please do not come back unannounced. If you want to talk, call or email first and respect my answer if I say I'm not ready." "This is not over," my father said as I began to close the door. "You're right," I agreed. "This is just the beginning of me valuing myself enough to set healthy boundaries. Goodbye." I closed the door, then leaned against it, my heart racing, but my resolve firm. For the first time in my life, I had stood my ground with my parents without being consumed by guilt or the desperate hope of finally earning their approval. Moments later, my phone buzzed. It was Victoria. Mom and Dad came home really upset. "Dad keeps saying you have changed." Mom is crying in their bedroom. "What happened?" I replied simply. I stood up for myself. "It's new for all of us." Her response came after a long delay. "I think I need to learn how to do that, too." Those words, so unexpected, gave me the first real hope that something positive might emerge from this painful upheaval. Not a fantasy reconciliation where my parents suddenly became the loving, supportive people I had always longed for, but perhaps a healthier relationship with my sister and new patterns for both of us going forward. The letter I had left on that hospital bed had indeed changed everything. Not by magically transforming my parents, but by finally giving me permission to transform myself from a perpetual people-pleaser, desperate for approval, into a woman who knew her own worth and was no longer willing to accept crumbs of affection where a feast of love should have been. 6 months have passed since that day I left the letter on my empty hospital bed. 6 months of healing, growth, and profound change. I sit here in my new apartment in a different city, 40 miles from where my parents still live, reflecting on how much has shifted both around me and within me. The physical reminders of my near-death experience have faded. The last of the hives disappeared weeks ago, and my breathing has returned to normal. My new medical regimen, carefully designed by Dr. Rivera, has kept my autoimmune condition stable. I still have to be vigilant about potential allergen exposure, but the constant anxiety that once accompanied that vigilance has subsided. Moving to a new city was a decision I made 2 months after my hospital stay. I needed a fresh start, somewhere without the shadows of old patterns clinging to familiar corners. My company was supportive, allowing me to transfer to a different branch office. The apartment I found is on the top floor of a newly constructed building with state-of-the-art air filtration systems, perfect for someone with my health concerns. What has been most remarkable about this time is discovering how many people were ready to step up and become my support system when I finally created space for them in my life. Natalie visits every other weekend, and we've developed a friendship that goes far beyond our original work connection. Mrs. Garza and I speak weekly by phone, exchanging recipes and stories. She reminds me of the grandmother I never had. I've made new friends in my new city, joining a book club and a hiking group for people with chronic health conditions. These relationships are different from any I had before. Without the desperate need to please that had colored all my previous interactions, I've found myself capable of authentic connections based on mutual respect and genuine care. My relationship with my family has evolved in ways both expected and surprising. My parents and I maintain minimal contact. They call once a month, and I answer when I feel emotionally equipped to handle the conversation. These calls are brief and somewhat superficial, but they no longer leave me feeling drained and inadequate. I have accepted that they may never be capable of the deep, nurturing relationship I once craved. And strangely, that acceptance has freed me from the constant disappointment of unmet expectations. Victoria, however, has undergone a transformation I never anticipated. 2 months after my hospital stay, she moved out of our parents' house and into her own apartment. She even rehomed Snowball with a family friend who had a large yard and children who adored him. I realized I never actually wanted a dog, she confessed during one of our increasingly frequent calls. I just wanted Mom and Dad's attention, and they always gave me whatever I asked for. It wasn't fair to Snowball or to you. That level of self-awareness from my previously self-absorbed sister shocked me. When I asked what had prompted this change, her answer was both simple and profound. Your letter. Not the one you left for Mom and Dad, but what you told me about having to be perfect to try to earn their love. It made me look at myself and realize I've been doing the same thing, just differently. I was being the dependent, needy daughter because that got me their attention, but it was making me into someone I don't actually want to be. Victoria and I now meet for coffee once a month. Our relationship is still healing, still finding its new shape, but there is an honesty between us that never existed before. We are learning to be sisters without the distorting lens of our parents' favoritism. Therapy continues to be a cornerstone of my new life. Lydia has helped me understand that the healing process is not linear. There are still days when the old habits of thinking try to reassert themselves. Days when I catch myself overachieving to prove my worth or minimizing my needs to avoid being difficult. But now I recognize these patterns for what they are, echoes of a dynamic I have chosen to leave behind. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned is about the nature of family itself. Blood relationships are given to us by circumstance. But true family, the people who show up, who value us, who respect our boundaries while supporting our growth, we choose and create through our actions and commitments. The nurse who stayed past her shift to hold my hand when I was fighting for my life showed more family loyalty than the parents who chose a dog walk over their daughter's bedside. Natalie, who drove me to the hospital and visited daily, demonstrated more care than the sister who couldn't be bothered to relay an emergency message. Mrs. Garza, who fed my cat and brought me soup, embodied the neighborly concern that is its own kind of family bond. My near-death experience clarified with brutal efficiency what truly matters in relationships. It's not shared DNA or legal ties. It's not grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It is the consistent choice to show up, to see the other person fully, to respect their needs and boundaries, to care about their well-being as much as your own. I've learned that forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation. I have forgiven my parents for being unable to give what they themselves probably never received. I understand that their treatment of me likely stems from their own unhealed wounds and limitations. But that forgiveness does not obligate me to continue participating in a dynamic that caused me immense pain and nearly cost me my life. Perhaps the most profound lesson has been about my own worth. For 26 years, I believed that if I could just achieve enough, sacrifice enough, be perfect enough, I would finally earn the love and attention that should have been freely given. I now understand that my value as a human being was never something I needed to earn. It was my birthright all along. The letter I left on that empty hospital bed was not just a goodbye to a toxic family dynamic. It was a hello to a new way of being in the world, as a woman who knows her worth, who sets healthy boundaries, who chooses relationships that reflect rather than diminish her. Value. If you're watching this and recognize yourself in my story, if you are the family scapegoat, the overlooked child, the one who has spent your life trying to earn love that should be freely given, please know that you deserve better. Your worth is not determined by others' recognition of it. You do not need to achieve perfection to be worthy of care and respect. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to stop trying to earn love from those unable to give it freely, and instead direct that energy toward building a life and relationships that honor our true value.